Good morning, everyone. So this morning we're going to start this very beautiful little crystal heart wrap, and I'm starting with 4 pieces of sterling silver round soft wire at 12 inches long. I have the centers marked. You could be using copper wire or any wire of your choice, and my heart-shaped crystal is about a ½ inch all the way around. You know, certainly it's shaped like a heart, so it's actually a ½ inch where it's wide and a ½ inch this way. But it should work pretty good with 4 pieces of 20 gauge wire. Mine is pretty deep. It's about a ½ inch in the pavilion, and I'm going to show us how to bring the wires back around to the back and create some depth to accommodate that very deep point. I have 18 inches of 26 gauge round sterling silver weaving wire. You could also be using 28 gauge if you'd like, and this is 18 inches long, and I have my finger at the approximate middle of the wire. I'm going to go ahead and change my focus so we can get a little closer. There we go. And I'm going to start with one of my base wires, and I'll create 5 single coils just to the left of my center mark. 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I'll just live about 1 millimeter to the left of my center mark. I'll go ahead and pick up my second base wire, align my center marks, making sure that my wires are even, and I'm holding on to the leading half of my 26 gauge to work on the other side once I get there. And I'll take my 26 gauge and I'll jump up, come around both wires twice. And while you're making sure that the tension here is nice and firm, you want that tiny little gap in between these 2 wires so that on the second wrap from the back of the frame wires you can come back to the front in between them and get positioned for the next frame wire. My 26 gauge is very, very oxidized, is why it looks like it's dark, but it'll clean up. So now that I have those 2 wraps, I'll pick up my 3rd frame wire, get my center mark aligned, make sure that my ends are even, and then I'll go over these 2 frame wires, the middle one and the top one, twice, and I'll encircle them by coming back between wires 1 and 2, come up, and I'll make a second wrap. But when I come back through, I'll come back through between those 2, so the middle and the top one, and I'll get positioned to wrap in my 4th and final base wire. So I'll pick that one up. I'll align the center marks and make sure my ends are level, and then I'll go ahead and make 2 wraps around these 2 upper wires. There's 1. And there's 2. And on the second one, I'm going to come down the back side and I'm going to wrap the 2 center frame wires, which means I have to come back through just below the second one so that I can wrap the second one and the third one, the two center wires. And I'll go twice around these two. And then on the second time around, from the back side, I'll drop clear below to the very bottom, and I'll wrap the two bottom base wires. To finish my little segment of a pyramid. And then I'll end it by making 5 single coils on the lowest base wire. And I'm maintaining just the slightest gap the whole time so that I can get back in between here. And I'll make 5. I'll just use my fingers and push them together into a nice little stacked pyramid. And I might be a little bit off center, so I'll just use my fingers. They slide quite easily still, so you can just push them. It's not critical to be exactly center, but just get that top mark on the center one. And once you're there, you can take some flat nose pliers or some nylon jaws and just give a slight tap and tap those wires down into a nice segment. Okay, I'm going to clean my wire so it doesn't look so dark, and I will be right back and we'll continue. Alright, so that's a little better. So we have our first segment, and I've used some of the length on the right hand side, and I've ended both sides of my pyramid with 5. So I'm going to continue single coiling on the lower wire to create a little stability for the back. I have 5, and I'll just count about 1/2 inch. This is the center point. So this lower coil, my goal is to wrap enough to get me to here, and in my case that's about 3/4 of an inch. Yours might be a little bit different, but I'll just count these wraps. It should be about 20 of them. And there is 20. And that's pretty good for now. And I'll just go to the other side and I'll repeat another 20. Okay, and that's 20. I use my fingers and just carefully push my coils together, making them nice and neat. The one side of my 26 gauge is a little bit longer than the other side, obviously because I invested from this side into the pyramid segment. So right here, I'm going to double check and make sure that my wires didn't shift as I was weaving. Sometimes they do. You want to just make sure that they're not crisscrossed. And sometimes it's easier if you use a little bit of tape to help you keep these ends under control while we bend around our stone. So I'll just tape my wires. I'll use a couple of pieces of blue painter's tape. I'll make sure that my wires are not crisscrossed, and I'll come a couple of inches away from my working area, tape them all together, and because this is quite a bit of length, I'm going to put a second piece of tape here closer to the end just to help me hold on to everything. And I'll carefully walk over to the other side, and I'll repeat with a couple of pieces of tape over here. And I'm putting all my tape flaps up. This kind of helps you. It's a little tiny thing, but so that you know which side is the top, front, and so that when you start bending these wires, all the tape flaps are in one direction. They won't fight you. Okay, so once everything is nice and taped, I'll get some flat nose pliers. You could also use your chain nose pliers, and maybe I'll use my chain nose. And I'm going to make a bend in this wire that will fit the bottom bend of my heartstone, and that's about 90 degrees. So I'll get my plier right on my center of the stack here. You want it to bend so that that top point becomes the center of your wire. And my pliers are slanted because these are tapered, so I just want to make sure I get a nice even bend on 4 wires, with that pyramid stack being in the very middle. And that worked out very nicely. Your stone, the point of your stone should sit quite beautifully. Oop. Right in there. It's a little squirrely because we're not in there. But you just want to make the point of your wires slope with the point of your stone. So we're going to make this bend around the stone, and you can do it either in the air or you can do it on your mat with the flat side of your stone down, but I'll do it up here in case we're holding it. And I like to kind of hold it like this with the point of the stone in between the crevice of these 2 fingers. You can gently just shape the sides along the sides of the stone here. Just keep downward pressure on your heart. Make sure the point of it stays in that crevice. And as you come around the stone, it might get a little bit squirrely. Do the best you can to hold it all level. And I like to bring these wires together up here and then work down towards the stone. I only have to keep my focus on the point of my stone staying in the point of the wires. And I'm bringing these wires together, kind of flat on flat. It's easier kind of at the point of a tape where you can kind of work them and pinch them together as you go down. So sometimes this is easier, like I said, on the mat, but I'm trying to be up here in the camera for you. So just hold it like this between your fingers, and you're going to start to pinch down. And I like to leave about a 1/2 inch so that it's a nice, long, elegant slope and not come right on top of the heart. As you pinch together, you'll notice the wires begin to separate. You'll want the front one, just help guide it on top of the stone, and you can let the other ones kind of slip and fall, along the pavilion slope in the back as it narrows. Okay, once you get it close, and that's pretty good, I'm going to come down here to my mat. I'm making sure that this pinch stays center so that I have a nice centered bail. And I'm just looking to make sure that everything's on this nice horizontal line, and it is. Ooh, it's a little bit hard on your hands. So take a break if you start to get sore in your fingers or your grip. Just going to work these wires. Round wires a little more squirrely than square wires, so if you're working round wires, you kind of have to make them go together up here. It's just a little bit of finagling. You want to keep them level, so 4 wires against 4 wires evenly if you can. Helps you out. And once I get that, I like to just put yet another spot of tape there so that I don't have to worry about all that as I work down here. And it'll be a little less stress on my hands. So I'm just getting a piece of tape. Now I'm going to bundle the whole thing together, all 8 wires, with them as evenly stacked as I can. Be careful for your stone, it's still loose down there. Just keep the tension closed on the wires here so it doesn't fall out, or you can slip the stone out until you get this intersection together. So right here, once I determine where is my center, I'm going to make and I've got my wires, you know, splayed out the way I want them. I'm going to make a very deliberate crease with a bend, and then to the other side. So just a hard jiggle in both directions. Don't take them out of order and don't distort them. Just get a nice firm, you know, coming together of the wires right here. Nice firm meeting of the wires. And that looks pretty good. And you just want to finagle the front here, and we'll have room for adjustments as well, but we want to make sure that it's laying evenly on both sides. So that upper ridge of the pavilion, I want to make sure that all 3 wires are below that edge and the front wire is just running along the top edge. You know, sitting just on top of the stone. Okay, kind of like that. And that's pretty good. While I'm here, I have these wires here in the back still that I can use if I want to. And with these, all I'm going to do is, I'm right up here at the shoulders of the stone. For this one, I think I might make 5 more stitches. I really want to be at the upper shoulders of the stone, and then I'll make a couple of closing wraps. And if you're watching this ahead, because I'm pretty shy on this side of the wire, I'm going to make a couple more wraps just to get a little closer. You know, certainly I could have measured this out while the wires were still straight, but sometimes it's easier just to get the bend around the stone. So now I'll create a simple wrap going up and down to stitch these together. And I'm just going to repeat this pattern, but without doubles, just a single. All right, so once you get your stone shaped in there, we're going to do another little pyramid stitch just at the shoulder of your stone. This one we took double stitches. This one will only do 1 stitch up and down, but it's the exact same pattern. So I did this one ahead so that I could show it to you. And then on this side, if we counted the same amount of wraps on both sides, we should be at an even spot. And the first thing I'm going to determine is, were my initial wraps, you know, enough to get me to the shoulder? And I added about 5 more single wraps just to raise my position a little bit before I did that stitching. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on this side. And just be real careful about popping the stone in and out. It's still loose. I'll do 5 more single stitches on this bottom wire just to get me up there to my shoulder a little bit more. Taking the stone out certainly makes it easier to work. We're not locked in there yet. Just hold everything so that your shape doesn't go out of shape. There's 3. 4 and 5. You know, and if your 20 original coils got you to the shoulders of your stone, then you're fine, but I added a few more. Maybe you have to add more than 5. Once I get those added, I am going to carefully just pop this back in here and make sure that point is down there where I want it, and that my coils have reached where I want them to, and they do. And once I stitch them together, you know, it'll close them up a little bit more like that side. Right now it's a little bit of a spread. So I'll go ahead and start stitching, and I'm going to take the stone out because we're not closed up here, so I can always still pop it in quite easily. And I'll just make my pyramid stitches now. So I'll take, since I've got all my single coils, I'll start by wrapping once around both of the bottom frame wires. Then I'll pass under them. Since we're wrapping 2 at a time, we're jumping 3 at a time. So that wraps the bottom 2 there. Remember that we want to maintain our little spacing so that we can get back through. And now I'll jump in between the first and the second one so that I can wrap the second and the third one with a stitch, making sure it's nice and snug with no bubbles. If you need to tap it a little bit or use your plier to help you pull it a little bit, you can do that. And then to get the upper 2 wrapped, I'll go from the inside to the outside. I'll wrap the upper 2. Trying to stay in the camera here for you. So I've got 1 stitch on everything, and now I'm going to just come back down with a single stitch on everything. Before I do, I'll make sure that my wraps are nice. Not so tight that I eliminate the gap, but just enough. And you might have to use your nails to kind of part these wires a little bit to get back through them. It's because I have them taped up here, and that's for my convenience. I like to keep my wires together. So to go back down the stack, I'm going to come back through the top and the top frame and the one right below it. Come back through between wires 1 and 2 so I can wrap the center 2 frame wires. On my way back down that way. Come back through wires 3 and 2 so that I can wrap wires 2 and 1. And now I'm going to do 5 single coils, just like on this side to end it. And then I'll snap my stone back in there. And those 2 should be in a similar spot. If you pull everything and, you know, pull all the coil back, your 2 top coils should be fairly even. And since we're not tied together up here, I can easily make some room and pop my gemstone back into place. Okay, it'll be a little bit tighter now because the wires are tied together. I'm focused on making sure the point of my heart is on the bottom point, and I'm making sure that all these wires kind of slope, you know, going this way, that there's no gaps. My 2 upper wires should be just over the shoulder edge of the gemstone, kind of almost catching that groove between the first and second frame wire. And you'll just manipulate with your fingers gently to make sure that those 2 upper wires are holding in the face of that gemstone. And I like to just kind of squeeze here and, you know, with my fingers gently work those wires over my stone, and that edge is just tucked right in there nicely. Then you can look down and make sure that the wires, you know, are similar. This one can go a little lower. So just like that. Whoop. Work with patience. You see my edge is right in between those two wires. It's almost like you're making little rails, okay? And my two stitches are right up here at the top shoulders, and my point, you know, is sitting nicely at the bottom of the frame. Okay? And if you get these edges in there just right, it should hold it. Okay? We're going to catch the top part of the heart now, and I'll do this by releasing the tape. I'm just still holding everything. The heart is not locked in there, but we'll let go of some of this tape so that we can work down some of these wires. Just carefully take it all off. Don't wreck anything. You've got a little basket going on here, so I'm going to keep downward pressure on my heart while I hold all of it and the wires together. I'm going to take the very front two wires and I'm going to pass them through the opening. Right there at the edge of the heart, see, it's going to want to squirrel on you, and I'm trying to let you see by letting go of my grip. These two bands should be at the right spot. Your heart should be sitting in here, you know, the way you want it. And then you want to fold down this inside wire. Keep the pressure of the band that way so you don't separate too far. You see, we just want to grab that top shoulder. Make sure you're repositioned. We'll have an opportunity to make adjustments, so don't worry. Take this one down. Make sure you didn't give it, you know, didn't let it get any slack. Ooh. Trying to let you see there. Make sure that stays over the shoulder of your stone. Just make a curve to the back. So these two wires curve to the back. They're nice and flat. That curve is just catching the top of my stone. And, you know, again, these two bands are freely open. So if you don't think you've caught it, make sure it's sitting flat and then just squeeze up here and get a better perspective on it. And if you need to, let's go ahead and put tape back up here. Just get all those wires back together. Grab a spare piece of your tape that you can still stick around here just to help you a little bit. Hold those together so you can work this fit down here. So you see how these two front ones are just over the shoulders. This next one is just below the edge of my stone, and then the other two fall just below that. And that's pretty good there. Woo! I know it was a hard bend. Make sure that the heart is sitting nice and flush in there. And that one side is not higher than the other. It's always good to look at it, you know, from this perspective so that you can make sure you stay flat. The table stays even. Okay? And that's looking really good. So once you get that fit, you can hold onto the corner there. Let me turn to the back. Ooh, a little top heavy. Hold on to that corner right there. And we're just going to make, you don't want to come off the shoulder, but we're just going to make a tiny, tiny little curl right there at the back shoulder. And if you need a plier to help you do that, you can get your round nose. Once you get that initial turn, it's just a tiny little tension curl right there. Then I'll do the same on the opposite side. It helps to hold that wire locked in. Do the same on this side. Push in a little bit to make sure you're on the shoulder of your heart. Make sure you're taped up here so you get a nice perspective on the turn, that the wire is positioned where it needs to be. And I'm just going to take my thumb and get it started, but I'll show you. You can grip the plier right here and then just push around it until you get that turn. You want that curl really living right there at the back of your heart to help lock this wire and give some pressure. So I just made a little turn. That was probably a little tighter than it needed to be, so I'll open it up a little bit. Okay, just like that. Just take your time. Okay, now with these two here, just get them looking nice. Bring them together. Let them split into a little V. And then right here, I'll just get another wire of 26 gauge, and I'll stitch these two together right here. And then I'll stitch them into the frame by passing through that little opening that's right there. It's a little tight to do, but we can do it. So I'm going to get about 6 inches of 26 gauge fine silver wire. My fine wire is very oxidized. Make sure that all of this stays together. It's real important to keep these together up here. So if they're starting to part, get another piece of tape and make sure that that all stays together while we work, so that you have the frame sitting the way it should be sitting. Okay, and now I'll take my 6 inches and I'll just do a couple of weaving stitches down here to get these together. I'll insert into the one, get right here at the base of it, and I'll make a 360. It's a little squirrely until it's stitched in. Reach over, do a complete 360 around the second wire, and bring them together. Make sure that you're nice and centered coming along the back here. Go around both of them, do a 360 around the lower wire, go up and do a 360 around the upper wire, all the way around to the back side. And those 3 stitches right there, 3 or 4 stitches, should hold those wires together nicely. You can do a little pull, make sure they're laying against the stone nicely and evenly without pushing the front out. And then we can stitch. It's a little tricky, but you can use that space to tie these two onto the frame here. And we can part those wires a little bit by using our handy map pin that we've talked about in some of my other videos. Just carefully slip it in there, open up the space slightly. Nothing too dramatic, just enough for you to get this wire stitched in there. Pull it all the way through. Make sure you don't wreck any design. This is 26 gauge, so one pass should be enough to hold it for you. If you're using 28 gauge, I would try to do that twice. So then without any slack in the frame wires, I'm going to make 1 3/60 around here once I get that stitch in there. You know, to make it really secure, you could go around twice anyway, and I might, because it's easy to do. I can go now make a stitch from the front to the back so that I have one on both sides. So you see the stitch to the left. Now there's a stitch on the right. And then I'll end it and lock it in by doing a 3/60 around that side. So now we have a stitch on both sides, and those two wires are living nicely over our pavilion and down the stone to give a little bit of protection. And if you need to take pliers, and you know, these two wires still move this way, so you can make some alterations, clean them up a little bit by doing simple pinches and making, you know, both sides nice and even. When you're ready, we can get rid of the leading 26 gauge right here. Just take a little snip on it. And turn it underneath. Okay, and just come back and clean everything up. Make sure that nothing shifted or altered too much while you're doing your work. The stone is still loose. There's still work to do, but it should start to feel like you've got a nice clean base for it. If you don't like being able to see these wires, it's easy enough to push them off to the side. I would try to do that, you know, clean and beautifully. So I'll take my plier right here and just make a nice dent in that wire. I'll do the same to this side, just below the spiral. Make a nice left-hand dent in the wire. Make them as even as you can. You'll feel length pull up from those two, and it's quite fine. Just make sure they, you know, don't break off, and then you have more light coming through it and less wire showing. Okay, that's pretty good. Tap that cut end back down. And then make sure that the tip, you know, the back tip of your frame stays in place. You can easily use pressure from your pliers. Look down on it this way. Keep things nice as you're working. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, so we can leave that hanging down there for a minute. And just for the sake of things, I'm going to go ahead and remove this 26 gauge here. And I'll start to remove the tape down here. Remember that these wires are not tied together yet, so once you remove the tape, it springs open. You know, it's a little tighter because we got this, but it still springs open. Alright, so there's layer one. Alright, so once the two back wires are tied up, remember that your frame still splits open, so I'm always pinching right here to make sure I got a nice perspective on it. And we'll just do some simple crisscrossing across the front. You know, there's room enough there. If you want to tie a couple of beads, you can do that. And probably now would be the time to do that if you wanted to. But in this case, I'm just going to make sure that I hold the sides of my stone. I'm going to work with the two front wires. And you can either start with the left or start with the right, whichever you want. But I'll take from the right hand side, and I'm just going to do a very low cross not quite horizontal, but almost to the other side. And then I'll take this one and do the same. My concern would be that where they cross is at the center. So my focus is there, and I'm making sure that both wires lay back nicely and that it looks nice. Once I get those two crossed, I'll just hold everything again. And again, starting with the right hand side, take that wire and just push over to the left, letting them cross. And then I'll take the other wire from the other side, push over to the right, letting them cross. So I'll just make sure that those two stay nice and centered. So these 4 wires make a nice crisscross. And once I get them crossed where I want, I like to put a little bit of tape up here. I'm a tape monster, to make sure that my wires are all together the way I need them to be. And it also helps my hands out. So I'm just going to put them up here. A nice big tape. And I'll make sure that this entire back 2 wires are nice and straight on top of my stone and centered, and that looks pretty good. And then these wires here, if you want to drop little beads on them, you can do that, or you can tie little beads on them till, later after you want. But I'll start one at a time, and I'm just going to make sure to hold everything flat and on a level plane. And right here at these 2 back wires, your crisscrosses are all center. Just going to turn it sharply to the back, almost as if to make a 90-degree. And this one as well, making sure that my crisscross happens in the front. Just take a nice easy bend to the back, making sure they're as level as they can be. And then I'll chase them with the 2 other bent wires. Again, just easy pressure right there to get them sloping to the back. All right, once you get them back there, I like to just turn to the back. The 2 outside ones, I'm going to tighten up slightly. I'm not going to push, I'm not going to pull. Just going to make sure that it back bends right there at its edge. And I'll slope it down. Get it a little tighter across these wires, and I'll do the same with this side, making sure that these 2 are fairly even. I just crisscross the wires in the back. Then I'll do the same with the 2 upper ones, starting with this side. Same side I started on. Make sure they're crossed the right way. I'll just take and sharpen up that bend a little bit. Do the same to the other side. Check the front, make sure that's looking pretty nice. And then my focus is going to be to bring these 2 top ones back up. So once I have them bent back on each other, and almost doing like cross arms in the back so that they look nice in the front, I'm going to turn them back up, holding everything right here, putting my thumb right there to kind of give a little bit of a base. And I'll start with the one that's on top. Just going to make, I'm not pushing, I'm not pulling, but I'm making a very deliberate bend right there, straight back up to the top. And I'll do the same on the other side, right at the edge of my first wire. I'm not pushing, I'm not pulling, but I'm making a very deliberate bend straight back up to the top, so that your wire ends up like this. So once those 2 are turned up, I can go ahead and, that looks pretty good there. It's a little bit of a tricky move, kind of getting them side by side like that. We can make some small adjustments later. But now we'll get the bottom ones to come up and do the same. Just right here at the edge, I like to just position them like this and turn it so that it matches that first turn. Same with this side. Just hold everything together. Get it right there at its edge. And you're just going to make a turn straight up the back. Whoop. Remember that our stone still isn't locked in, so it could slip out. Once you get all 4 wires turned back up to vertical, work them so that they lay side by side in their order. And we'll tighten all this up with our fingers and we'll manipulate it, but you'll get all 4 of these wires back together like that. Take the tape off of the previous ones. And I'll just get some tape, some fresh tape, and I'll tape these closer so that I can manipulate these wires. Okay, so just get them side by side and then tape them. And then our focus is going to be right here to make sure that this looks really nice before we proceed. So it's almost like a little Celtic braid that you've started. And just with your fingers, making sure that all 4 of these stay together, you can just make little scooches if you need to. If it looks good, don't mess with it. And just make sure that you're very happy with that design. You can use your fingers and lower these wires a little bit if you need to. Just shape it so that it's pretty for you. And we'll have a little bit of opportunity to do some more shaping once we weave all the top together here. But you want to keep all 4 of them together. And let's get 3 feet of 26 gauge weaving wire. Just making little adjustments there. And again, we'll make some adjustments some more once we get the tops weaved together here. All right, so I'm going to get 3 feet of 26 gauge fine wire. I'm using sterling 28 if you choose to. And it's going to be a little bit hard to weave these together while they're all up here. But you know, you want to keep this together here, so if you feel like you need a piece of tape around the heart and everything, you can do that. Remember that the 2 very center wires are the ones from the very back. So I'm just going to give a little bit of space and start first by giving a 2-inch leading tail here. Whoop. And I'll do a couple of wraps along these 2 center ones to get anchored. And you'll just keep them side by side. It's a little squirrely. Make sure that you've got a nice tight wrap there, that you're sitting at your base. And then we'll handle these in pairs. So come over here and we'll make a complete 360 around this pair. Come up. make a complete, we're just going to pass underneath the center ones so that we can wrap the other side. So just push those slightly forward. Come up, pass underneath the center pair and to the opposite pair. You want to keep these pairs side by side like this. Just work carefully, patiently. So we kind of did like a figure 8 underneath it. And then I'll wrap a complete 360 around these two. So now you've got 3 pair of wires. They should be very secure here at their base with these 3 wraps. The bail I'm actually going to create out of the 2 outside pair now that they're tied together. In the center pair, I'm just going to push slightly forward. You want to make sure that you're still centered to your heart. It might feel a little bit loose because it's, still loose. And we'll just use these wires in the back, these outer pairs here, and we'll do a figure 8 weave. So from here, I'll come up and pass through the center and around through to the other side. And I'll do a 360 on the other side. Pass through the center to the opposite side again. Do a 360 around this side. Pass through the center to the opposite side. And I'll weave for about 1/4 of an inch, and then I will spread these out a little bit as I go. So after those 3 or 4 stitches, I'm going to look at the front of my frame, make sure that these 2 wires stay facing forward, make sure that I'm still centered and that my little design looks good, that these 2 wires are evenly parted, and I'm just going to give a little bit more of a part to them so that the shoulders, they about right here, that they match the shoulders. I'm going to weave up about 1/2 inch, and then I'll push these 2 wires together again for the second half of my bail. So I'm down here, I'll do a complete 360 around this side, come through, do a complete 360 around this pair, come through, complete 360 around this pair. And as you work these 2 round pairs, the wires might want to do like this. You'll just keep control over that by giving gentle love taps and keeping these wires side by side as you work. If you're working with square wires, that'd probably be a little bit easier. So there's my 360, and now I'll pass through to the opposite side. Do a complete 360 around this pair, then back through the center to the opposite side. Just keep working in this pattern until you reach your distance for the bail. Periodically, I'm going to push everything back and do slight tapping, making sure that you're growing your bail, center to your pendant. Okay, once you've reached your distance, go ahead and make everything nice. Give everything a little tap. You'll bring these 2 pairs back together. So this is the widest point of the bail right here. I'll hold it right here and just give a slight bend to these two wires to the left so that they cross the center. I'll do the same here. Hold your coils back, just give a bend to the right. Make sure that crisscross happens in the middle of your pendant so that you have a center line. So once you get those bends, you can back it out a little bit and make this portion the same as this portion. So it's about a half an inch, to where they cross. And then I'll just turn them back to straight again. Doesn't have to be exact science. Just like that. So you get like a little diamond shape right there. And then we'll continue this weave pattern until we get to here. And now that we're going from wide areas into narrows, it'll want to slip forward quite a bit. So you just want to make sure as you're weaving to hold everything back. Keep the spacing between these pairs consistent. Don't let them shrink or grow so that your weave stays with nice tension. Right, once your weave has reached the other side, you can take these two center wires and carefully, neatly lay them back down again. Press them right here so that they're side by side and flat up against the center of your bail. I still have some weaving wire left over on my 26 gauge. So here at the end, I'll just incorporate the two center wires into the bail by attaching with just a simple wrap once all the way across it. I'll catch it a couple of times. So I'll come all the way around with a 360 and just do another simple 360 around the two center ones. Come to the opposite side and do a 360 around this pair. So that locks it all together. And let's just double check your stone. You can lay these three wires side by side like this. And then double check everything on your stone. So let's clean it up if we need to. If you need to adjust your little design here, work carefully either with your fingers or with pliers and carefully shape those a little bit more if you need to. If you don't need to, then don't. I'm just going to get this side pushed out slightly. And my focus is to see that my crisscross is center. And if I have any weird bends, I can just manipulate them gently with my pliers, just like that. And that's beautiful. I want to make sure that these two front shoulders, are fairly down and even. And that looks really nice. Just open those up a little more. So you can manipulate yours until you love it, making sure that everything rides nice and flat. Make sure that your two shoulder wires are up on your stone. Make sure that the table of the stone is nice and flush with the top of the pendant. And then we're going to go ahead and bend these bail wires to the back. We still have some weaving wire left on here, which is really good. I've got about a foot left. And I want some of that so that I can tie off when I get down here. So you can use a dowel or you can use a pen or a Sharpie marker or just your fingers, whatever you have to help you make this bend. But we'll bend it right here at the widest point of our bail. Just using my thumb It's a lot of wire moving all at once, so just keep control over your entire frame and try to get that bent at the widest portion. When you get it bent over, just keep control of everything. You want to make sure you got a nice space for a bail. As these two come back together, what I like to do is put a kind of outward bend on the bottom of the wires here, just all together, so that when this comes back down to the frame, they'll meet right here a little nicer, just like that. You can part these so that the two on the left, go to the left. The two that were on the right go to the right, just like that. Make sure that they're nice and neat and even, and that they're sloping down your pendant nicely. And then after you get the two sides parted, you can go ahead and part these two as well. Kind of find it's easier when I do the pair and then do the top. So just like that. And we'll handle those in a little bit. But just part them so that you can get the neck of this frame down. Look to the front, make sure it's really pretty. If you need to put a slight forward bend to that, you can. A little bit, make sure your profile is nice. I still got this leading wire. I want to make sure that ties nice. I'm going to tie a bead ball in there, is why I left this here. So you can use it. If you don't want a bead ball there, you can just break it off from there. While I'm down here, I want to tie off to the frame, and the easiest two wires to get to would be the two center wires in the back. I know it doesn't look that way, but it's true. So I'm going to push this here. The two center wires are those straight ones. Your half round is, your 26 gauge is going in a certain direction already, so just leave it going in that direction. Feed between your design and those two back straight wires. Come all the way through. Push a little bit with your hands so that you can grab all that. Make a little space in those two upper wires. Come between, push close, and tie it up. So I like to go like twice, maybe 3 times, depending on what you need to hold all of it together. This is 26 gauge wire, so it's pretty sturdy while it's still pretty small. And looking in the front, you see my 2 stitches I just made should be living nice and neat right there. And I should be able to cover them up when I put the bead ball there. If you don't cover them up, just make sure they're nice and neat so that they look nice. And I'll come in between the 2 center ones in the back and the 4. When I've got my wraps nice and tight, I'll just go once around that outside pair and lock it in. You can then come back this way and go a couple of times around these 2 back center wires to finish that off. And I'm going to leave it hanging out there just in case I want it for something. Woo! Good job, you guys. So here's the front so far. It's very pretty. We've got design wires that are living in the back, and we've got this little crisscross design in the front. Make sure that all your wires are nice and level so that the pendant is nice and level and that they're living, in similar places on your frame. Okay. While we're here, let's go ahead and stick a 3mm or 2mm bead ball in there. This is actually a 2.5mm ball. So I'll drop it into that leading tie wire, just like that, and I'll feed it through to the back. So past the design so that we don't tie onto our design, and guide it all the way back here. Make sure the ball lands in the middle, just like that, and then you can tie it off to one of these wires back here. I usually tie it off to just this front side one. Make sure you got no slack in that wire between the ball and the frame, and then take a couple of wraps right here to the front closest frame wire on this side. And you can break that off or cut that off. And give it a little tap. And that looks super cute. Alright, so once you separate the wires, I've got the two frontmost ones splayed out. And then I have two going down the back. And I have my 28 or 26 gauge right here. I'm going to go ahead, for the sake of the visual, and just break this off so it doesn't confuse us. And these two are very deliberately running along, you know, the pendant edge here. So almost as if to be another, you know, setting up to be another back layer. The two that I have splayed out in the front, I'm going to crisscross around the front again to create more design, and then bring them to the back and lock the wires in. So this crisscross is in front, which means I'm going to start with its opposite side. And I'll just make this, you can make this as big or as minimal as you want, but just carefully guide the wire. Make a nice deliberate curve right there, and then guide the wire across the front of the stone till you get to the opposite side here. Just like that. When it's in position, hold it, make sure it's nice and flush, and then right there at the weave, the edge of the weave, just turn it back. So you've almost made like a big L shape with it. Okay, we're going to lock it around these two wires over here, but before we do, let's get the other one in position. So we'll do the same with this opposite wire. Get a nice curve on it. And just control it as it comes across the front of your stone. Make sure those two are looking the way you want them to. You know, the back of them live right here, so if you need to raise them or lower them a little bit to get them even with each other, make sure that the stone is, you know, it's still a little loose, so it's, make sure it's sitting as it should, nice and flush, so that you get good perspective when you bend these to the back. Okay, and the crisscross is happening at the center of the stone. Both my curves are beautiful, and I'm right here at the edge of the weave. I've got my thumb over it, and I'm just going to make a nice soft 90-degree turn to the back, just like that. Okay, and you can fiddle those as much as you want or as little as you want. Once you get them to the back, you're going to tie them and lock them into, you know, tie these wires down and lock them in. So there's excess here. I don't know how big your hearts are, but I'm holding my two shoulder bends in where I want them. The two wires here are laying down across where I want them. And I'm making sure there's no excessive bubbling going on at the front here. Okay, you can either mark it and then cut it, or you can just hold on to it like I'm doing. It's about 3 or 4 millimeter, so that you can make the turn and lock in these two wires. You can either do that with chain nose or round nose pliers. Just get a little turn to the back. And then I'm going to get my chain nose pliers and just complete the turn. I haven't shifted anything, I haven't moved anything. I've just locked that wire onto these two. Just like that. And now I'll do this opposite side. Make sure that the shoulders are living where you want it to. Right there at the top of your weave. Looks even on both sides. These two wires are laying close. There should be room just to the left of that, little nub that we made. And then holding everything, just going to take the length off. Get a fine plier. Turn the tip of that inward and onto itself, kind of back bend it so that you can squeeze it closed. Just like that. Just work it until you get it. Just like that. Alright, so I went ahead and did the one side so you could see it, but we left off with these two wires coming down the back, and we had just locked them off right there on either side. So I took a fresh piece of 26 gauge weaving wire at 12 inches, and I'll do the same for this side. I anchored it here, I coiled down, I locked into the loop, kept coiling, and then locked into that inside bare wire when I got here. So that's what we'll repeat on this side. Before we do, we'll make that loop usable to us by turning it up on its end. Those little inside loops that we made earlier. And you can just scooch this wire a little bit if you need to. And all you need to do with this loop is gently turn it from horizontal to vertical. Don't take it too far away from the side here. So I'm going to push it back to the edge. I'm going to make sure my wire isn't too much on my gemstone, but that loop is up just enough for me to use it. And I haven't pulled it out, I've just turned it up. Okay, so I'll go ahead and cut 12 inches now, 26 gauge weaving wire, and I'll anchor it by inserting a leading inch up here. Just hold on to it. I'll make one wrap to this side, and I'll wrap more with that short end once I go. I want to make sure I jump and grab that wire that we locked in from design. So just jump over it like that. I'll wrap a few times until I get to the loop. Might be about 5 or 6 times. And then I'm going to carefully feed my weaving wire at least once. I'm using 26, so once is enough. If you're going 28, try to get through there twice. And lock down these two wires. Oop. I hope my coil didn't cross over. No, it didn't. So I just fed the one coil through there. Don't make it so tight that you can't wrap again. I'm just going to do it that once. And then keep wrapping for another ½ an inch until you think you make it almost to the bottom of your pendant. And just push all that together really nice. Try not to pull too far out because it affects everything in the front. So all that should be, you know, still very tight, and your design should still be very nice. As you're coiling these two, try to keep them this way, you know, horizontal on top of each other. And once I get close, I use my pliers to keep the wires kind of like a little wall, you know, upright, and start to make a curve on these two coiled wires that resembles the back curve of your pendant, you know, and the wire right below it. Once you get these two curved over, and I'll make a couple more stitches, but it'll be easier. You just want to make sure you're nice, and then right here, go ahead and turn the wire back in this direction. You have to catch that bare wire on the inside. So if you need to lift it a little bit, try to pay attention ahead of time to make it easier on yourself. Okay? So I'll make 2 or 3 more wraps around these two. Maybe just once, actually, I'm pretty close. And then I'll feed through and grab the wire on the inside of the frame and lock into it. And I'll go around that a couple of times. Make sure I get that wire a couple of times. And make sure to get that nice and snug. And make sure not to pull, you know, too hard that you dislodge the security of your stone there. So look to the front. The table should be level. If it's not, you can make some slight adjustments with just your fingers here, scooching the wires, making sure they're even on both sides. And that looks pretty good. Then I'll make 2 or 3 more wraps around these two just to get closer to the bottom base here where the other one is. And after you get down here and it's secured on, I go ahead and I go back up here and make 3 or 4 little wraps with the leading fragment. Once I get it, I'll just snip it off to the inside, tap the wire down, this was the one holding my bead ball down, so I just tighten that up a little bit. So I just snipped it off and let the cut live inside there. I'm looking at everything in my heart, so now I have a nice double layer in the back, and you can see that the tip of my stone is protected. There is, the heart slopes down, so there's going to be a little more of a shallow spot in the back here. Sometimes the point can dip down, so you have to give a little bit of pressure here to keep the point, from falling back. You see how it falls back? So after you, and it's still a little bit loose because of that. So make sure that everything is center and that the side wires are still living nice after all of that work. I like to start to pinch these in after they're wrapped. And we have a little bit of 26 gauge on either side. So I'm going to take these two last back wires, bend them slightly forward so I can get to them, and I'll weave them together nice and tight so that I can keep that space kind of closed and cinched in like that a little bit. Okay, once you get that, just break this wire off right here. Hold it with a little bit of tension, make big circles until it breaks, and then you've got a nice clean join of those two wires. The rest of these, we can use for more design, and I'll just fold them out. This one to the right, this one to the left, right here at the base where we tied them on. Make sure that nothing shifts too much. And I'll part those two a little bit so I know what I'm looking at. If you feel like you need a little bit of pressure here, like we were talking about, if the bottom tip of your heart still wants to push forward, and mine does, most likely yours does, then what we can do with these two is just make some back curls that will give us a brace right there. We don't need much. I would say that's, I don't know, maybe not even an eighth or an eighth. So I'm going to leave about 1/4 of an inch there, maybe just 5 millimeter, a little bit less, but enough that I can make two very comfortable turns to turn this wire inward and give downward pressure to my stone at the very bottom here. You just want to make that very clean and neat and point them so that they face. I could have left these actually a little bit longer. I'm a little distorted when I look in the camera. So maybe 1/4 of an inch, and just point them down to the base of your stone so that you have a little brace that keeps, a little pressure. I'm going to have to push these down slightly. So come up here and make sure that I've got control over everything. I'm just going to give slight downward pushing to make sure that these are seated as far down as I can get them. And it should be just enough to put pressure on the bottom of the stone. And again, like I said, you might have left yours a little bit longer than I left mine. I was really cutting it close there, so maybe 1/4 of an inch when you do that. Then you just want to make sure and check the stone, Make sure to check all the wires because everything adjusts whenever we adjust something, and that's beautiful. And then we have these wires down here for design. So it's got just that little bit of a bump, and I'm not worried about the bump there because we're going to bring some design around it. If you don't want design, you can turn all of these wires into that crevice and cut them off in the same way we just did, making sure that your heart stays center and that none of that work pushes the bottom of the stone out of place. Alright, so once we get those two wires turned back, we're left with just our design wires down here. And let's just make sure everything is tightening up now. You're making sure that the center of your heart and the bottom tip are riding nicely inside the frame. They might still shift a little bit. You're making sure that the two top wires are riding over the shoulders nicely. And you're making sure that all of these wires are actually pressed up against the stone down here from the work that we've done. Back here, you can tighten things up slightly by using a very soft touch either with your fingers or your pliers, making sure that nothing shifts. I've got my fingers over everything, and I can kind of push down and inward on that layer of wires we just created. If you can't do it with your fingers, you can take your pliers and give the slightest gentle squeezing and just motion that back set inward a little bit to snuggle up to the stone a little bit more. Make sure it doesn't change any design in the front. You're making sure that the heart hasn't shifted. You're making sure it still rides evenly in this direction. You're making sure that your beautiful design up here hasn't changed. All right, this wire is too short to do anything with, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And I'll do that just by some tension and big circles until it breaks gently off. I'll tap all four of these wires so that they lay side by side down here. Just get a nice level playing field. And I'll split these so that there's kind of two to either side. And you can do these however you'd like. I'm going to turn them up and then I'm going to weave them. So I will start with these two outer ones. And I'm about 2 or 3 millimeter away from the coil, just making a 90-degree turn straight up. And then I'm just going to make a kind of a gentle curve off to the right to just follow the curve of my heart right there. I'll do the same with this side. Take the most outside wire, just a few millimeters from the coil. Try to make it the same as the other side. It doesn't have to be exactly. Turn it up 90 degrees. And then just turn it to the side so that it follows the contour of the heart there. That looks pretty good. I'm going to look down this way and make sure those two wires are living at about the same distance from the pendant. Okay, and then you've got the two in the middle. We're going to repeat that action, but we're going to give it a little more length. So I'm probably going to take about 4 millimeter. You can mark it if you want to. You can eyeball it. I'm just going to eyeball it. And I'm making a 90-degree turn I'm pushing down as I bend my wire up so that this wire down here stays nice. Once I get the 90-degree turn, I'll hold it right there. Just push up with my fingers and push over to the side. Come down here, make a little outward turn, and then just with your fingers kind of shape it down so that it kind of lines up with that previous one. Okay, woo, not too bad, you guys. You don't have to close this space right here. Just give it a love tap so that it lays nicely next to the other one. And then we'll do the same thing. They don't have to be in the the exact length. You can make one slightly longer than the other for a little slinky look, and I might do that. Bend it up 90 degrees, hold it down here, turn the wire out slightly. Give it a very gentle squeeze so it lays down next to this one. And I'll pinch these two together. Give it a little bit of a out turn so that it's cute. Make sure that these are centered down here. You can even turn these little guys out a little bit if you want to for design. Just slightly. And pinch them back in again for some grace. Get these two lined up next to each other like that and like that. And that's super cute. And now these are ready to weave or to coil or to put beads on, whatever you want to do. Okay? I'm going to weave these and, just give a little more shoulder to my heart design here. So I'll weave up, curl them back, probably tuck them away somehow back there. All right, so come back for that in the next part, and I'll see you soon. All right, so I have a fresh piece of 26 gauge weaving wire at 18 inches long, and I'll just insert a leading 2 inches so that it passes through the center there, so I can anchor to those 2 center wires later on. For now, I'm just going to bend it back and hold it. And I'll start weaving these 2 wires. So I've anchored and made 2 wraps. You can do whatever weave you'd like. I'm just going to come up and do a very simple 360 along the top one. Come down behind both of them, 360 around the bottom, up, 360 around the top, and continue to weave the pattern of your choice until you get about 1 inch or to the place where you think you can curve around to the back side. So I would weave to about here or a little bit more depending on what you'd like. And as you weave, these 2 wires will start to go more side by side so that you can see this beautiful weave as you work up. You could also use 28 gauge wires here instead of 26 for a finer look. And again, my wire is dark because it's very oxidized, but it'll clean right up once it's all polished. So I'm going to weave for my distance, and then you weave for yours. We'll attach once we get up here, so don't worry about trying to attach to any of the side frame right now. Just weave until you get your distance. Once you get up here, you can start to curve back behind the pendant. And I like to be just not too flared out, but a little bit so that you can see my weave. And there's some bare spots right here. It's the perfect place to tie off. So once you determine how you want your curve, just take your finger and motion these two wires back up to horizontal and position yourself so that you can wrap in to those two wires right there, those two bare wires right here on the frame. Okay, so I like to keep them upright so that I can keep weaving to get to my destination a little easier. Alright, and when I get close, just tap everything down. You can also gently use your plier and help you turn these big weaved wires a little bit. You have a couple of inches of your weaving wire left, or you should have, and we can use it to tie onto the frame right here by grabbing those two wires right there. Just wrap through carefully. Make sure that the big curve is where you want it and that it's beautiful. Make sure that there's no slack there. And then you want to come and grab these wires a couple of times to make sure it's secure. And again, I'm using 26 gauge, which is a little more substantial, but I'm still probably going to go through a couple of times. So I made a 360 around that inner frame wire, that inner design wire, this one, and then I'm going to go back through this space right here. Make sure I've got a nice tight wrap on it, that my curve looks the way I want it, and that's beautiful. Go ahead and come over these two and do a 360 around this one. Okay, and now these are pretty much tied on fairly well to the frame here. Just manipulate them so that they're not flimsy and they lay nice. If you're done with them, you can wrap a couple of times completely around them, cut them, and tuck them back here or make a couple of curls. You could make some additional design with them. There's some length left. I'll make that decision at the end of things, but for now I'll just take a couple of solid wraps around these two now that they're attached to the frame. And I'm going to get rid of the weaving wire just by cutting it and tucking it way back here. And just turn those two wires kind of upright and back. Okay. So it's a gorgeous curve. You can use your pliers and just make sure that the weave is showing. And these two guys right here, again, can either be used for additional design, or if you want to get rid of them, you know, you can cut them and tuck them back right there, nice and neat, even with some curls if you want. So now we'll repeat on this side, and you'll create this side of your heart pendant with the same type of weave or a different weave, whichever you prefer. We'll take the leading wire actually before we go on and make a couple of wraps right around here. Not too many, just twice to get it cinched on. Then you can break it off or cut it off right there and tuck the wire into that space. And there should be room there for you to get a couple of wraps from the other side anchored for when you weave up this side. Beautiful. And you can even tie a bead ball there at the end if you want to. So I'll meet you back up here when these two are weaved. I've got a fresh piece of 26 gauge, 18 inches long, and I'll anchor down here the same as I did the opposite side. Okay, and I'll leave myself a couple inches here to hold on to. And then I'll start my weave by making 2 anchoring coils on this bottom frame wire. And then I'll keep weaving for my distance there. All right, and when you think you've weaved enough distance, carefully use your fingers and start to curve a nice pretty curve to the back of the heart. I've got a little more ways to go, but I'm pretty close, and right about here I'm just going to brace my thumb and turn these 2 wires back upright. So that I can get close to those 2 bare wires where I'm going to tie in. So I'll weave a little bit more and then I'll get attached to that. Okay, so I weaved all the way up to here. I attached, just like I did the other side, to the 2 little bare frame wires on the inside of the frame. And this is too short to do anything much with, so I'm going to go ahead and just cut it away. But I do want to attach these 2 sides. If I had a couple more inches, I would have just gone with it. But once you get these attached to the frame, to give it more stability, you would want to attach all of them together. So I'll just take some scrap 26 gauge. I'll encircle all 4 of them here, keeping them side by side, and I'll make a 1/1 weave to get them all attached together but remaining side by side. And then I'll go back so that I have 2 rows. And that's a pretty secure weave to stitch them together with. Come look to the front. Make sure that your weaves can be seen and are beautiful and are riding kind of pointed to, make sure they're faced forward. You have additional design wires up here if you want to do any more goodness. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this leading end of the 28 gauge because I don't need it. 26 gauge because I don't need it. And I'll make a few more stitches up here with this one to raise these wires a little bit because I might use them for some design. So I'll go one more layer of weaving just to get them all tied nicely together. Just like that. All right, and then to cinch things up a little bit, you can take your pliers and squeeze these two gently if you need to, here and here, and just bring them a little closer together if you need to. If you don't do it. Look to the front, everything should be feeling pretty good. 2 of those wires, are on top and the others are below our weave here, so the weave kind of goes in the middle of our side wires. And they're both sloping back to the back nicely. And now if I want to do, anything with these, I can give some forwarding shoulders here. Watch that the tip of your wire doesn't scratch the gemstone. Turn it out a little bit. Pinch it all the way back. Just give a little forwarding bend. Turn it out a little bit. Slope the wire. And then just carefully pinch it down. So I'm just going to trim it. I'll use my plier and just turn the end of it down. Point it down into the weave right there. And see if I love that, and I do. And just let it live right down here. Probably have to tie it up here to make it stay, and that's fine. I can still do that with this wire and cinching those a little bit closer together. So I think I'm going to shorten this up and just dive the end of it down into the side of the weave. You can do what you'd like. they're kind of, the cuts are just kind of living right there, and that's quite fine. You keep them cinched together with this tie wire in the back right here. You know, just by making a few more stitches, and that'll hold all that in. So you just want to make sure that those are comfortably in there with your fingers. Get them kind of living where you want to see them. Make sure that the weave stays turned forward. You can give a little bit of pressure to start hardening all of that up. And then I'm going to wait to use this because I want to also incorporate these two wires if you're going to do anything else. If not, you can just end them. And that's actually quite pretty. I might just end it and not do too much more. So to make sure that these stay put, I'm going to take, you know, one more lap of weave around all of these and make sure that the two outside wires here that I tied in have some extra support that I designed with there. Have some extra support by tying them in a little bit more. Did you see how I cinched that together a little bit more with the two inside ones here? Just weaving up a little bit more, and then I'm going to take one more wrap around that outside ear to catch it. Again, to make sure to keep it all pulled in nice, just like that. Okay, welcome back. I thought I might just stop and explain what I've been typing to you through some of the instructions here. These two initial wires that I bent down, originally this one had a cute curl and some other stuff. You hear a lot of disturbing background noise, so long story short, in all my frenzy, I cut these a little bit shorter than I intended. And while they are, you know, quite okay, do you see that they still have motion in them? I would have preferred them 3 or 4 millimeter longer, so that rather than just ending and being tucked right there, you see it loose tucked, I could have folded it over this little weave and just locked it in a little bit. So that would have stabilized that. But I love the look. I didn't want to cut it away entirely. And I have these two wires up here I thought I wasn't going to use that I will now use. And so I have these two wires remaining. I'm going to go ahead and just add one more layer down the front. And I'm going to do something similar. I'll take it right here just above the previous loop. Bend it over on itself 90 degrees. Or more, I mean. Grab it there and just give it a bit of a turnout. And I've shaped and reshaped this wire a couple times, so mine looks like it's a little bit crunchy. But I'm going to go ahead and just run it down the front. Close this up a little bit more so that it lays nice and flush. And I'm not crushing it because it's laying on top of this one. I'll turn it out. And then maybe I'll go just slightly lower with it. Make this curve really exaggerate. And then I can go right below it and right behind. And I love that. Alright, so I've just sloped it down, brought it to the back. I really love that. So before I do anything, I'm going to see if I can get the other side to be similar. So I'll just turn this up a little bit and get it out of my way. I care about this little bit right there. So I'll just turn it like that and keep it there for a second. And now with this one, do the same thing, making sure that my wire's nice and straight, and I can just eyeball the approximate distance as the other one. Take a 90-degree bend forward, hold it from the back, help the wire all the way down. Looks pretty similar. Can turn it. Make it look similar to the other side. Come to the front. Hold it right there. Get a nice grip on it. Really exaggerate that bend. And then go ahead and close it up. Be real careful. It doesn't have to be a complete smash, just like the other side. Right there. Just so you get just that little bit of a splashed wire kind of look up here. Just like that. And I'm going to just eyeball, hold it in right here at the curve. You see my curve over here is kind of going out and then coming right in at the weave there. So I'm going to really exaggerate this curve and see if I can get it to do something similar. This pushed in slightly, the one underneath it. So I'll just pull it back out. I wish I had a little more length on that. I'm going to say it 18 times, but that's okay. It's not going to go anywhere. There, I just got my shoulders to, I want to see that. It's part of the look. The look. And I'll push that one in slightly more. So your focus is just shaping this wire so that you can see the curve of the design underneath it. You don't lose that. And if you like these little bits up there, you know, you can work carefully to make sure that those stay as well. And again, we can continually make adjustments. Let's make sure to lay those down so that you can see them properly, and that's pretty good there. I'm going to try to get this one a little slimmer right here. Okay. And make sure that they're coming back here and touching, touching my weave at about the same place on both sides. And I'll just take a long curve and get this one going upright like the other one. I like to look in the back. Sometimes it helps me to see where I'm at. Then I turn and look in the front and I make sure that the design looks the way I want it to, and it does. So back here now I'll come and cinch these two together because I need to, you know, I need that hold on them. And then I'll just curl the ends once they're sewn together. This would be the opportunity if you wanted to slip an extra gemstone in there. You could. Remember that the whole design covers up the gemstone, so I would make it something bright but not where you want to actually see the gemstone. You don't mind the cage over it, but it's a nice little pocket, just saying. And this is a good opportunity because you don't have to fiddle too much. You can just stick it in there and then tie it in there when you close these two wires up, okay? And then you still have just a little bit more if you wanted to do just even another little whoo out the side hammered, but I'm gonna call it a day right here. That is gorgeous, and I don't want too much more disturbing that. All right, so I'm going to get a piece of 26 gauge wire. I'll just get 6 inches. Got 6 inches of 26 gauge wire. Just going to hold my 2 sides in. You know, I could flip them in there, tuck and cut them, and, you know, kind of try to pinch them in there. My fear is that they will show out the front, so this is why I'm tying them back, tying them together back here. So I'll just get these two together, get some weave wire. That's the beauty about being a wire weaver, is that you have the ability to do this. Make it look beautiful and make it look very secure. I'm just going to anchor onto this side a couple of times. And then I'm going to come over and make sure that I can get around this guy a couple of times. And before I do too much, I'm going to make sure that both of my wires are hitting my weave right here. Once I get a stitch or two around them, then I can take this and take a plier and make sure that if I stand them up, they're a little easier. Stand them up and kind of fold them out. It's a little easier to weave, okay? And the goal is to get, you know, these to stay together, but to not really see the stitching too much from the front, because I love the design. So I'm going to do a figure 8. It's a pretty hardy stitch. Around 360 the top. It's actually like 1.5. The next time you go, you cross. And it pulls them together pretty tight. Now I'm going to look to the front. I'm going to get rid of the long one right there, and I'm going to turn. It probably needs to be about the same as that one right there, 1/4 of an inch or so from your weave, and I'm just going to turn it back. Into a nice neat little loop behind it. I can't see it through my design. And I'll do the same with the other side. I'm leaving these weaving wires on because I'm still, you know, I want it to be a little tighter even yet. So now I'm going to cut, make sure everything's flat right here. And I'm going to cut this one to be about the same 1/4 inch as the last one. And I'm just going to take it and fold it back on itself. Cut it a little shorter. Okay. Those two are folded neatly back on themselves. And I have this weaving wire up here to make sure that I can attach. You see how it's kind of out and flimsy? We need to sew it in there to make sure it stays. So if you have your mat pin handy, there's a space, even though it doesn't look it, right through here. Oh, that you can take those wires or that tie wire through. Okay? So from here I'm attached to my loops. I'm going to come behind all my design and just feed the wire through the weave. nice and tight. I can lay these down a little bit later. Don't worry about it so much right now. Get these loops centered. And then, you know, again, I always like to make more than one pass. So right here, rather than do anything complicated, when I come out this side, I'm going to make sure there's no slack. I'm going to just take a 360 around both of them right here. They're woven together. But if I stay below these loops right here, and I might just pull these up a little bit, make sure they don't slip down too much. So I just went completely around both of them. And now I'll go do one more pass. This is the beginning one. I'm going to leave it here in case I need to stitch down to help me pull these two a little closer. Okay, but we'll worry about that in a second. Focus still on just making sure these two frame wires get tied into place and tied beautifully into place. So there goes my second lap. Make sure that my 26 gauge is below those loops and that there's no slack. Okay? And to tie it off, obviously, all I need to do is anchor a couple of times around one of these loops. This one is pretty good and open. Actually, I'll come up this way. You can open the loops actually and help you get in there a little better. So if you're watching ahead, maybe don't close them all the way until you get these wraps going on. Can't be seen in the front. Looks pretty decent in the back. When you feel like you've got it secured a couple of times through this loop, then you can either break it off or cut it off right in there. I'll just give some tension, do big wide circles until it breaks. Woo! Okay, now let's look at the front and focus. We're 10 seconds from done. These are the two wires we just tied down in the back. I want to make sure that they're laying down properly up here. So I'm going to manipulate them just with my fingers a little bit, making sure that my design stays beautiful. These ears can fall forward a little bit. If you need to stitch anything, you can stitch it right here and right there, just once, you know, with a 26 gauge or something to hold those down together if you can't get them to lay down. Or what I'm going to do is stitch back here to see if I can close this space up to help lay those down a little bit better, and that should actually work out. So I'm going to do a figure 8 through here. I had already started one. We had already started one. When we are done with these loops, make sure to tap them closed and neat. And then we're going to continue with this wire, the short one. Pull don't pull yourself out of shape. And I'm almost out of wire here, so I'm probably just going to end it by doing a single wrap right over here and letting the wire break off in there. So that's a pretty neat back side. It's nice and flush. If it's not, make it that way. Make sure your ears are level with each other and that the distance between the closure is similar on both sides, and then look to the front. This is the wire we just did, and it's still bubbling a little bit, so I think I am going to, well, first I'm going to just tap it, squeeze these ears down, tap all this down, tap it, go through the bail and make it flush with the bail. Should harden it up slightly. Make sure it's laying down right here. Just do soft moves. And then on this side also, can make sure to go all the way inside the bail. Level and tap these things out. You're holding on to everything. You're not changing anything, you're just settling everything. Making sure the design sits. And then on this side here, I'm going to just give, so I'm going to push this forward slightly, curve it out a little bit more. Don't overwork anything, don't overthink anything. And all of that was so that I could lay this wire a little bit more down along this back side here, right there. And the same over here. See, it's nice and laying down. Same over here. Just going to tap everything nicely. Try to lay it all down together. I'm giving a slight forward push to those two ears to make sure they kind of stay in view. I'm going to line these two up together a little bit. Try not to alter or change your design there. It's beautiful. All of this also is hardening these wires every time we, pinch nicely and help it lay down here and give it a little pressure there. Just going to pinch all that to help lay that down. Hold all this forward and then give a slight pinch, delicate, in control, to flatten, some of these out. They're not going to flatten out 100%. You're just kind of trying to level them out together and make them, give them a little tension. There we go. If you get this right and you get them hardened by doing this, and if you feel like you can't do it without plier marks, you could put some tape, some masking tape at the end here. But give, small love taps like this, keeping all of your lines in focus. Turn your pliers if necessary. I'm giving hardening pressure here. Keep the ears pushed forward as I tap everything flush. I hope you can see what's happening. Okay, I'm working these two wires more flush with the frame while trying not to change, this part of the frame, the front part, while trying not to change or crush my design or give myself too many plier marks. Okay, I think you get the idea. Work yours until you feel like you are happy with it, and you'll start to feel these substantially harden. If you're, if you feel like it isn't going to stay, it's moving too much, you can put a stitch here and a stitch here with some 26 gauge, and just like we did, you can pass through the bail, catch the other side and just hold on to them a little more. Or you can stitch here at this intersection or here. I don't feel like I need to. I mean, by the time I put this through polisher and Dremel, it's going to be quite hard. And then it's beautiful back here too. And you can also do, some pressuring from back here. Make sure it's all laying down nice. You see how that little bit of pressure hardening, caused a little dent in these wires to lay down with the frame a little bit. And so I'll do some sanding. That'll also harden it up a little. All right, you guys, I'll be right back in a few minutes. All right, friends, here she is, all finished, sanded, oxidized, and polished, and she's gorgeous. So I hope you really enjoyed that. It's got a beautiful backside finish. The pavilion is protected in a nice, sturdy, deep cup, and she's got quite the shine on her. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did or were able to make one, please give me a thumbs up, leave me comments, let me know how you're feeling about this project, and I hope you'll be back to make another one with me soon. Much love, you guys, much thanks. We'll see you for the next one.